Wofford taking on Virginia Tech. That's going to be a 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff on Saturday, September 17th. Now, that game is currently off the board. Probably not going to see a number till either the night before or Saturday morning. And even though the Hokies lost their opener, they did bounce back in a big way against Boston College this past week. They beat the Eagles 27-10, and they continue to play some really tough defense. Dax Hollifield has 19 tackles, 2 PBUs, and a couple of fumble recoveries from that linebacker spot. Now they're taking on a Wofford team who's yet to score a point this season. They got shut out by Elon and Chattanooga to start the year. So that said, I'm going to lean toward Virginia Tech getting the job done against the number. All right, next matchup I have for you, it is going to be Georgia taking on South Carolina, 12 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, Georgia's minus 24.5, totals 51 and a hook. The 2-0 Bulldogs have allowed just 3 points through 2 ball games. They're allowing just 141 yards passing a game, and they're in the top 10 in fewest yards allowed. Now, Malachi Starks and Shmael Mondon have 15 tackles between the two of them. Meanwhile, offensively, Stetson Bennett's completing 75% of his passes for well over 650 yards. Now, they're taking on a South Carolina defense who's had a tough time stopping the run. These guys are allowing 250 yards on the ground through 2 contests. And when it comes to offensive production in this one, the Gamecocks have done little to establish the run game. They're rushing for only 59 yards per contest. Now, total-wise, South Carolina saw their opener fall under the number. Meanwhile, Georgia's 2-0 to the under themselves. I'm going to lean toward Georgia minus 24.5 and the under 51 and a hook. All right, next ball game I have for you, it is going to be UConn taking on Michigan, 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Michigan's minus 46.5, total 60. Now, the Wolverines failed to cover a 52-point spread last week against Hawaii. And to be fair, as good as Michigan is, this is a pretty absurd number here this week. The UConn Huskies covered the point spread in their opening 2 contests of this very season. They're also rushing for over 205 yards a game, believe it or not. Now, Nathan Carter, he's rushed for nearly 400 yards already, and he averages 6.5 yards a carry. Meanwhile, defensively on the other side of the ball, Jackson Mitchell has a team-best 39 tackles along with 1.5 sacks. Now, when it comes to the total in this one, UConn saw 2 out of their last 3 fall under the number. Meanwhile, Michigan's 2-0 to the under themselves. I'm going to lean toward UConn plus 46.5 and the under 60. Next ball game, it is going to be Oklahoma taking on Nebraska, 12 o'clock East. Oklahoma's minus 10, total 66.5. Now, typically in this spot, I'd say a team who just fired their coach would play some inspired football and keep it close. But I don't think that's the story for Nebraska this year. They lost 2 of 3 to start the year, and they failed to cover in all of those ball games. Typically in Major League Baseball, like the day after you fire a coach, they always end up winning. I don't think that's going to be the case with the Cornhuskers here. Their defense has been putrid this season. They're allowing nearly 500 yards a game of total offense. They're also facing an Oklahoma team who's scoring nearly 40 points a game themselves. And they can run it and pass it. They can do both. Dylan Gabriel's completing 71% of his passes, and he's yet to throw a pick. Meanwhile, Marvin Mims, he has nearly 250 receiving yards and a couple of scores. Now, when it comes to the total, the Sooners may have to, they may look to put this one over themselves. Meanwhile, Nebraska saw 2 of 3 this year get over the line. I'm going to lean toward Oklahoma minus 10 over 66.5. All right, next matchup, it is going to be Youngstown State taking on Kentucky, and that's going to be a 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Now, that game's currently off the board. Another one of those games that will probably, probably see a line posted maybe the day of or the day before. But the Kentucky Wildcats are 2-0, and they had a big win over Florida this past Saturday. I got about an hour and 20 minutes left of this video. Do you need help with anything right now?
No, I got it.
Okay. Anyway, Kentucky, like I said, 2-0. Big win over Florida this past Saturday. And that's going to put the Wildcats at 2-0 against the spread for the season. And I'll tell you what, man, these guys are playing some pretty tough defense. They've allowed just 29 points through 2 contests. Kedron Smith has 5 tackles, a fumble recovery, and a pick 6. Meanwhile, J.J. Weaver and DeAndre Square, they've combined for nearly 30 tackles between the two of them. Now they are taking on a Youngstown State team who's off to a hot start in the FCS. They've beaten the likes of Dayton and Duquesne. That said, though, these teams are certainly not Kentucky, so I'm going to lean toward the Wildcats getting the job done against the number. All right, next matchup, it is going to be Texas State taking on Baylor, 12 o'clock Eastern start time. The Baylor Bears are minus 29.5, totals 52. And as much as I think the Bears will bounce back here, this is a pretty big number. It really is. That was kind of a devastating loss last week that the Bears suffered. And, even though they are playing some pretty good defense, they've yet to record a takeaway. Now, they're taking on a Texas State team who plays some pretty tough defense themselves, believe it or not. I know a lot of folks don't follow Texas State football, but they got some guys that can play on defense. They're allowing only 96 yards a game on the ground, and they're in the top 40 in the country in total yards allowed. Now, they also blasted FIU this past Saturday, 41-12. Cordell Rogers has a couple of interceptions, including a pick 6. Meanwhile, Sion Topu and Jaron Morris, they've combined for 35 tackles. Now, when it comes to the total, both schools saw their Week 2 action fall under the number. I'm going to lean toward Texas State plus 29.5, under 52. Next game, Abilene Christian taking on Missouri, 12 o'clock East. No line posted for this game yet. Now, Abilene's certainly no slouch in the FCS. They're off to a 2-0 start to the year, and they've allowed only 27 points in those victories. Now, they're also facing a Missouri team who's most likely going to have to cover double digits. I think this is probably going to be a pretty big number when it's finally put out there. Now, the Tigers of Missouri, they've allowed 64 points already through just 2 ball games. They've also thrown just 1 touchdown pass during that time frame. Big number. I think Abilene can keep it close. It could be Abilene Christian getting the job done against the number. All right, next matchup, Villanova taking on Army, 12 o'clock East. Now, this game's also off the board. And the Army Black Knights, they need all kinds of help on defense. They've allowed 79 points through just 2 contests. And not only were those outright losses, they also failed to cover. Now, they're taking on a Villanova team whose offense is actually off to a hot start. The Wildcats are 2-0, and they scored 38 points or more in both of those victories. I don't know, guys. We might be able to see a possible upset in this one. Even if we don't, Nova should be able to keep this one within the number. I'm going to lean toward Nova plus the points. Next matchup, Southern Illinois taking on Northwestern, 12 o'clock Eastern start time. Another game off the board here. Now, the Wildcats are moving the football a little bit better here this year. Ryan Helinski's thrown for just about 750 yards already. Meanwhile, running back Evan Hall's got over 200. Running back Evan Hall. He's got actually over 250 yards receiving out of the backfield. When it comes to running the football, Hall's averaging nearly 5 yards a carry, and he scored twice on the ground. Now, they're taking on a Southern Illinois team who lost their opening 2 games, and they gave up a whole bunch of points in the process. The Salukis have allowed 97 points through a couple of games. I'm going to lean toward Northwestern getting the job done against the spread. All right, next matchup, Purdue taking on Syracuse, 12 o'clock Eastern start time. Purdue's the 1.5-point favorite. Total's 58.5. Now, Purdue's got a passing attack that's real tough to slow down. They're currently in the top 20 in passing yards per game, as Aiden O'Connell's got nearly 600 passing yards under his belt. And his clear-cut favorite receiver has been Charlie Jones. He's got over 20 catches for nearly 300 yards and 4 scores. Now, they're taking on a Syracuse squad who's beaten the likes of UConn and a kind of a downtrodden Louisville team. When it comes to the number in this one, the Orange did see their season opener fall under the total. Meanwhile, Purdue's coming fresh off a shutout win over Indiana State. I'm going to lean toward Purdue minus 1.5, under 58.5. Purdue's one of them teams I've always said, like, you know, they're going to lose 4 to 5 games a year, but they can beat anybody, any team on any given day. They can really just sling it, man. They can chuck it. Anyway, next matchup, Cincinnati taking on Miami, Ohio, 12 o'clock East. The Bearcats are minus 22.5, totals 51. And for laying 3 scores here, the Bearcats have struggled stopping the run a bit. Meanwhile, offensively, as good as they can be, they do have issues protecting the football. Now, they're taking on a Miami team who's actually got some pretty tough guys on defense. Ty Wise has a couple of sacks and 9 tackles for the Red Hawks. Meanwhile, Ryan McWood and Michael McDowell, they have over 30 tackles between the two of them. And when it comes to the number, Miami's 2-0 to the under to start the year. Meanwhile, Cincinnati saw their opener with Arkansas fall under the total. I'm going to lean toward Miami, Ohio, plus 22.5, under 51. Told you guys the other day I had a cigar on Sunday. I've been jacked up ever since. Jeez Louise. All right, next matchup. Long Island University taking on Kent State, 12 o'clock East. That game is off the board. And even though Kent State may be laying a big number here, they should be able to cover it. I know that's crazy, but they're taking on an LIU team who's allowed 37 points or more in both of their losses this season. I do look for Kent State to actually be able to move the ball efficiently Saturday. Give me the Golden Flashes, getting the job done against the number. All right, next game, Western Kentucky taking on Indiana, 12 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, Indiana's minus 6.5, total 61.5. And even though both schools have been fairly untested, I think it's actually the Hoosiers who have slightly more talent than their counterparts. Cam Camper's got just about 200 receiving yards already for Indiana. Meanwhile, DJ Matthews has 10 grabs for $160 and 2 scores. Now, they're taking on a Western Kentucky team who failed to cover in their opener against Austin Peay. They've also had a tough time establishing the run. They're 97th in the country in rush yards per game. When it comes to the total, the Hilltoppers are 2-0 to the under to start the year. Meanwhile, Indiana saw their opener against Illinois fall under the number as well. I'm going to lean toward Indiana minus 6.5, under 61.5. All right, next contest, Towson taking on West Virginia, 1 o'clock East. This game's currently off the board. Now, the Mountaineers could run into some trouble moving the football. Towson's 2-0 on the year, and they allowed just 34 total points in those victories. They're taking on a West Virginia team who can't stop anything. The Mountaineers allowed 93 points already in just 2 games. I'm sure they'll be laying double digits in this one. I don't think they're going to cover a big number here. I'm actually going to lean toward Towson getting the job done against the spread. All right, next matchup, Buffalo taking on Coastal Carolina, 1 o'clock Eastern start time. Coastal's minus 13.5, totals 59. Now, I am a little bit concerned about the Chants here. They nearly lost to Gardner-Webb this past Saturday, and they played a pretty close one with Army in the opener. I mean, those are two, like, not really good programs. Gardner-Webb, they're in the FCS, and they're not even good in the FCS. So definitely some concerns with Coastal. This Chanticleer defense, they're having a tough time slowing down the pass. They're actually 102nd in the nation in yards allowed per game. That's insane considering you're playing Gardner-Webb and Army. Army doesn't even, like, pass the football. But anyway, they're taking on a Buffalo team who covered against Maryland in their opener, and they do a pretty nice job protecting the football. Meanwhile, defensively, Sean Dolak has 22 tackles and a sack. When it comes to the total, Buffalo saw their game this past Saturday get over the line. Meanwhile, Coastal's game against Army a few weeks ago got over the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward Buffalo plus 13.5, over 59. Next matchup, it is going to be Bucknell taking on Central Michigan, 1 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, that game is currently off the board, and even though Central Michigan isn't great, Bucknell simply just can't move the football. Now, these guys are 0-2 to start the year, and they actually scored 14 points or less in both of those losses. They're also taking on a Central Michigan team who does a pretty nice job moving the football themselves, and they actually covered against Oklahoma State in Week 1. Daniel Richardson's thrown for nearly 700 yards along with 5 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Carlos Carrier and Joel Wilson, they combined for nearly 300 yards receiving combined. I'm going to lean towards Central Michigan getting the job done against the number. All right, next game, South Alabama taking on UCLA, 2 o'clock East. The UCLA Bruins are minus 15.5, totals 59. Now, keep in mind, that is an early game on the West Coast. That's a morning start time on the West Coast. But regardless, I'm going to tell you this much. The Bruins have done a nice job beating up on these smaller schools. A lot of times you see with colleges, especially big schools, they really take it easy on the small guys. They don't prepare. They kind of let off the gas. Not UCLA. They put up 45 on both Bowling Green and Alcorn State. As a matter of fact, the Bruins are in the top 5 in the NCAA in offensive yards per game. Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Ethan Garbers, they've combined for over 600 total passing yards. And when it comes to defensive play, it's actually Kenny Churchwell who leads the Bruins with double-digit tackles. Now, they're taking on a South Alabama team who is 2-0 in the year, but they beat up on the likes of Nicholls State and Central Michigan. When it comes to defensive play, the Jags are actually 87th in takeaways. Now, when it comes to total, South Alabama did go 2-0 to the over thus far in the year. Meanwhile, Bowling Green saw their opener get over the line. I'm going to lean toward UCLA minus 15.5, over 59 points. Next ball game, Ohio taking on Iowa State, 2 o'clock Eastern start time. Iowa State's minus 17.5, totals 50. Now, the Cyclones are playing some super tough defense. They're actually in the top 15 in the country in total yards allowed. They're also holding their competition to just 78 yards a game rushing. Now, Colby Reeder has 9 tackles, 2 PBU, and a pick from that linebacker spot. Meanwhile, Orion Vance and Bo Freiler, they have 17 tackles between the two of them. Now, they're taking on an Ohio team who's having a pretty tough time slowing anyone down. They're 128th in total yards allowed on the year. They're also giving up over 350 yards passing a game. Now, total-wise, the Bobcats are 2-0 to the over to start the year. I'm going to lean toward Iowa State minus 17.5, over 50. All right, next matchup, it is going to be Rutgers taking on Temple, 2 o'clock Eastern start time. Rutgers is minus 17, totals 42.5. Now, the Scarlet Knights, they've been real tough defensively. They're actually in the top 3 in college football right now in rush yards allowed. Robert Longerbeam, he also has 2 interceptions from the secondary and 6 tackles. And speaking of tackles, it's Chris Easian and Deion Jennings who have over 20 tackles between the two of them. Now, they're taking on a Temple squad who's 123rd in total yards per game. Now, the Owls have also had a tough time securing the football. They're 130th in turnovers. Now, total-wise, Temple saw their opener against Duke fall under the number. Meanwhile, Rutgers' opener against Boston College fell under the line. I'm going to lean toward Rutgers minus 17 and the under 42.5 in that tight window. Next matchup, Old Dominion taking on Virginia. And that's going to be a 2 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, Virginia's minus 10 with the total at 52.5. And despite being the 10-point fave, the Cavaliers haven't really, they haven't covered a point spread in 2 games. They're also having a tough time stopping the run. These guys are 108th in rush defense. Now they're taking on an Old Dominion team who loves to create turnovers on defense themselves. The Monarchs are in the top 10 in college football in takeaways. Jason Henderson also has a staggering 30 tackles through just 2 games already. When it comes to the total, ODU saw their opener against Virginia Tech fall under the number. Meanwhile, the Cavaliers, on the other side, they've gone 2-0 to the under this year themselves. I'm going to lean toward Old Dominion plus 10, under 52.5. Next matchup, it is going to be Murray State taking on Ball State, 2 o'clock Eastern start time. That game is currently off the board. And as bad as Ball State's defense has been, well, Murray State just can't move the football. They've scored 13 points in just 2 ball games. Meanwhile, defensively on the other side, they've allowed 97 points in those losses. Now, they're taking on a Ball State team who did put up 30 last week against Western Michigan. That was a push on the spread, depending on where you shopped at. Now, the Cardinals are also doing a nice job protecting their quarterback. They've yet to allow a sack on the season. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward Ball State getting the job done against the spread. All right, next matchup, Cal taking on Notre Dame, 2:30 p.m. East. Notre Dame's minus 10.5, totals 41. Now, the Irish just really aren't good enough to be laying double digits in any type of spot. I know that's my opinion, but I think we've kind of seen enough sample size here to determine that. This is not the Notre Dame of the past. They're currently 0-2 on the year, and they've had significant problems offensively. They're actually 117th in the country in offensive yards per game. Meanwhile, defensively, the Irish have had a tough time slowing down the run. They're allowing nearly 200 yards a game, and they've yet to force a turnover. Now, they're taking on a Cal team who's 2-0 on the year themselves, and they play some pretty tough defense. They're allowing only 13 points a game, and they're in the top 40 in takeaways. Xavier Carlton also has 2.5 sacks on the year already, along with 6 tackles. Now, Jackson Sermon and Olu Oladeju, they have combined for nearly 30 tackles themselves. When it comes to the total, Cal saw their most recent outing with UNLV fall under the total. While the Irish are 2-0 to the under themselves, I'm going to lean toward Cal plus 10.5. Under 41. Next ball game, it is going to be Tulane taking on Kansas State. That's going to be a 3 o'clock Eastern start time. K-State's minus 15, totals 47. Now, the Wildcats have looked real sharp on both sides of the football. Not only have these guys covered in both of their victories this year, the Wildcats are actually running for nearly 275 yards a game. Now, Deuce Vaughn, he's averaging 6.5 yards a carry this year. He scored 3 times on the ground. Now, I don't know if you guys have, watched K-State. You hear a lot of people talking about Deuce Vaughn. Not a big guy. You're going to see him for the first time. You're going to be shocked. This is a small guy, but he's shifty. He's quick, tough to tackle. Actually, tough to see him when he's making cuts through the line. Now, defensively, Nick Allen, he has a pair of interceptions from that linebacker spot, and it should come as no surprise. This K-State defense, they're in the top 10 in the country right now in takeaways. Now, they're taking on a Tulane squad who beat up on the likes of Alcorn State and UMass. When it comes to the total, both schools have gone 2-0 to the under to start the season. So I'm going to go ahead and lean toward Kansas State minus 15 and the under 47 in that tight window. Next game, North Texas taking on UNLV, 3 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, UNLV is minus 3 with a total at 62.5. Now, the Rebels are 2-0 against the spread thus far in this season. Covers against the likes of Idaho State and Cal. They're also doing a nice job throwing the football. Doug Brumfield's thrown for over 550 yards already and 5 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Ricky White, he has nearly 250 receiving yards through just 2 ball games. The wideout is actually averaging over 20 yards of reception. Now, they're taking on a North Texas defense who's struggled slowing down the pass. These guys are 123rd in the nation in pass defense. They've also yet to force a turnover. When it comes to covering the number, the Mean Green, they failed to cover in their last 2 straight. Now, total-wise, North Texas did see their most recent outing against Texas Southern actually fly 22 points above the posted number. Meanwhile, the Rebels saw their opener against Idaho State get over the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward UNLV -3 over 62.5. Next ball game, BYU taking on Oregon, 3:30 p.m. East. The Oregon Ducks are -4, totals 57.5. Now the Ducks were fairly uncompetitive in their opener against Georgia. They got blanked 49-3, and even though BYU's not quite Georgia, they're a lot better football team than they're getting credit for. Actually, I think they're probably getting a lot of credit now, but they're a good team, man. They're well coached. The Cougs are 2-0 in the season, and they beat the likes of Baylor and USF. And no real surprise here, guys. They successfully covered the point spread in both of those victories I just mentioned. Now, the Cougs are playing some incredibly tough pass defense. They're holding their opponents to less than 155 yards a game through the air. Max Tooley and Ben Bywater, they have also combined for nearly 35 total tackles. Now, when it comes to the number in this one, BYU saw their most recent outing with Baylor fall 10 points below the number. Meanwhile, Oregon's opener with Georgia fell under the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward BYU +4, under 57.5. Next ball game, Ole Miss taking on Georgia Tech, 3:30 p.m. East. The Ole Miss Rebels are -16.5, total 64.5. Now, the Rebels have had little issue moving it on the ground this year. They're in the top 15 in rushing, and they've got a couple of running backs with nearly 200 yards apiece. And even though they were fairly untested, the 2-0 Rebels are averaging 44 points a game. Now, they're taking on a Georgia Tech defense who's 101st in pass defense. Meanwhile, on the offensive side of things, they've actually been pretty bad. They're 120th in total yards per game. And when it comes to the total in this one, the Yellow Jackets are 2-0 to the under for the season. Meanwhile, Ole Miss saw their opener with Troy fall 19 points below the line. I'm going to lean toward Ole Miss -16.5, under 64.5. All right, next ball game. Definitely a game of interest. I'm talking about Penn State taking on Auburn, 3:30 Eastern start time. Now, the Penn State Nittany Lions are -3, totals 47.5. And the 2-0 Nittany Lions, they look real good on offense. They're in the top 20 in passing, and they're doing a nice job of protecting the football. Sean Clifford's thrown for nearly 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. Meanwhile, running back Nick Singleton, he runs like he's been shot out of a cannon. If you don't know the name, get to know it. Nick Singleton, this guy is outstanding. Young guy, freshman, but he's got over 200 yards already along with 2 scores. He looks just different running the football. He really does. Singleton's also averaging a staggering 10.5 yards a carry. Now, they're taking on an Auburn team who's been relatively ineffective in throwing the football themselves. TJ Finley's thrown for under 280 yards and has only 1 touchdown pass. He's also thrown 3 interceptions in 2 games already. Now, those games were against the likes of San Jose State and Mercer. They failed to cover in those ball games, by the way. And when it comes to the number, the Tigers opener with Mercer did get a touchdown above the posted number. Meanwhile, Penn State's 2-0 to the over themselves. I'm going to lean toward Penn State -3 over 47.5. All right, next matchup, it is going to be Vanderbilt taking on Northern Illinois, 3:30 p.m. East. And I'll tell you what, out of all the college football games across this great nation Saturday, well, this is one of the few games on this video that I'm actually betting on personally. So unfortunately, guys, I can't give you a free a play on this ball game. But if you want to see whether I'm betting on the money line against the spread or on the total in this one, there is a way you can find out, and that's to sign up for my college football tier package bets on my website. And just remember, guys, if you sign up for that package here today, you're going to get access to that membership every single day all the way until October 1st. And as an added bonus here, guys, We're actually going to throw in access to all my cheaper memberships on my website, absolutely free. So certainly a good value there. And of course, I'll include a link to that play in the description section below. And with that, guys, let's go ahead and move on. We're going to take a look at Colorado taking on Minnesota, 3:30 p.m. East. Now, Minnesota is laying 27.5 points. The Gophers are minus 27.5, totals 46. The Gophers are moving the football much more effectively than they have over the past season or so. And, of course, a lot of that's thanks to Mo Ibrahim, who's actually one of the most talented running backs in the country. This guy's been good for a couple of years. It was a shame to see him. I watched that game last year where his Achilles snapped like a twig. You could see it like rolling up the back of his calf. But I'll tell you, he looks back to his original form. He's gained over 250 yards already, and he scored 4 times. This is an NFL-type running back. And, of course, quarterback Tanner Morgan, well, he continues to do what Tanner Morgan does. You get first downs, protect the ball, manage the game. Very boring, very vanilla, very efficient. He puts you to sleep. Now, as a matter of fact, this Gopher offense, they're actually in the top 3 in the nation in offensive yards per game. I know that sounds crazy, but as of right now, they're moving it. Now, defensively, on the other side of the football, the Gophers held their opponents to just 36 yards a game rushing. Mariano Sori-Marin and Cody Lindenberg, they've combined for nearly 20 tackles between the two of them. Now, they're taking on a Colorado team who struggles moving the football themselves. They're 125th in total yards, and they're averaging only 11 points a game. So, needless to say, the Buffs are off to an 0-2 start, and they failed to cover in both of those losses. Now, total-wise, did I say Buffalo? I meant the Buffs. The Buffaloes, not Buffalo, the Buffaloes. Anyway, Colorado saw their opener fall 9 points below the posted number. Meanwhile, the Gophers on the other side, they saw their opener fall 2 touchdowns below the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward Minnesota minus 27.5 and the under 46 in the very tight window. Next game, New Mexico State taking on Wisconsin, 3:30 p.m. East. Now, the Badgers are minus 37, totals 46 and a hook. As bad as New Mexico State is, the Badgers are not a blowout-type team. They like to run the ball, do misdirections, lots of play action, pulling guards. Really boring offense. Effective, they'll grind you down, but really boring. Screen passes, rocket screens. I mean, the Badgers were also held to just 14 points last week against Washington State. That was actually an outright loss where they were laying 21 points. They were the 21-point favorite and got beat outright. Now, taking on a New Mexico squad who can actually play a little defense. Out of 3 games this year, they did hold their opponents to 23 points or less twice, believe it or not. They also successfully covered the point spread in their most recent outing. Now, the Aggies are currently in the top 20 of the nation in pass defense. Lazarus Williams has a pair of sacks, a forced fumble, and 8 tackles from the D-line. Meanwhile, Bryce Jackson and Chris Oho have over 40 tackles between the two of them. I don't know if it's Oho or Ojo. I've heard different pronunciations. But anyway, total-wise, New Mexico State's 3-0 to the under to start the year. Meanwhile, Wisconsin's 2-0 to the under themselves. I'm going to lean toward New Mexico State plus 37, under 46.5. Next ball game, little toilet bowl action. I'm talking about Stony Brook taking on UMass, 3:30 p.m. East. Now, this game's currently off the board, and UMass bettors could run into some trouble here if this number opens too high. The Minutemen are 0-2 on the season, and they've allowed 97 total points in those losses. Now, UMass was also plus 28 in both of those games, respectively, and they failed to cover both of them. That's crazy. Now, UMass has thrown for a pathetic, pitiful 65 yards in 2 games. That's a joke. Just execute. Put this team, ban them from the NCAA. Their leading receiver has just 3 grabs for 31 yards. We're leaning Stony Brook, getting the job done against this spread. They might win outright. Next game, Troy, Appalachian State, 3:30 p.m. East. Appy State's minus 13, totals 51.5. And even though the Mountaineers shocked Texas A&M last week, this feels like a trap game. Going to see a lot of money pouring in on the Aggies, a lot of recency bias, and to be honest, these Sun Belt teams always play each other tough. It doesn't matter what they do out of conference. Now, this Appy State defense is allowing over 375 yards of total offense per game. They're taking on a Troy squad who loves to sling it. These guys are in the top 10 in the country in passing, as Gunnar Watson's completing over 70% of his passes. Now, Watson's thrown for well over 600 yards already, and his leading receivers averaging 16.5 yards a catch. Now, total-wise, the Trojans saw their most recent outing get over the line. Meanwhile, Appy State saw their opener against UNC fly 67 points above the posted total. I think Troy can keep it close, might not win it, but that's a big number. I'm going to lean toward Troy, plus 13, over 51.5. Next matchup, Georgia Southern taking on UAB, 3:30 p.m. East. UAB's minus 11.5, totals 55. Now, the Blazers are coming fresh off a touchdown loss to Liberty. They were favored by 6, and unfortunately, they were only able to muster up 14 points offensively. And speaking of offensive problems, these guys are 124th in the country in turnovers. They're taking on a Georgia Southern defense who does a nice job taking the ball away themselves. Marcus Watson-Trent, he's also leading the team with 15 tackles. Now, offensively, the Eagles have really aired it out. They've done a nice job throwing it. They're in the top 5 in pass yards. And they're led by Kyle Van Treese, who's thrown it for nearly 800 yards on the season already. Now, total-wise, Georgia Southern saw their last 2 straight get over the line. One of those overs was an outright winner over Nebraska. I'm going to lean toward Georgia Southern plus 11.5, keeping this one close, over 55. Next matchup, UL-Monroe. That's UL-Monroe taking on Alabama, 4 o'clock East. Now, Alabama's minus 49, total 60.5. And as good as the Tide is, I don't think they're going to be like a big covering team this year. These numbers are getting ridiculous for Bama. The books must be just taking so much Bama money because that's a huge number. Now, they failed to cover a 21-point spread last week against Texas. They should have actually lost that game. As a credible sports bettor, I hate to throw out rigged, scripted. I mean, if you watched that Bama game last week, come on, man. Come on. And I get it. Sour grapes people are going to blame everything on the refs. I mean, they were blatantly missing calls and getting them wrong, challenging the wrong things. I mean, the announcers were bad. I believe it was Joel Klatt. I mean, he just couldn't believe it. It was just like, what are we doing here? And I think do they have Pereira? Is it Mike Pereira that they get? Or is it Gene Steratore? I forget, but they were all just like baffled. I mean, the refs had no clue. They had no clue. But anyway, if you saw the game, you know what I'm talking about, especially if you were betting Texas money line, which you probably weren't. But anyway, defensively, the Tide's yet to record a takeaway. Is that true? They haven't had a lot of takeaways. Let's just say that. Anyway, they're taking on a UL-Monroe team who's got a big win. They got a big win over Nicholls State on Saturday, and they actually put up 35 points in that win. Now, I know Nicholls State ain't good, but neither is UL-Monroe. Got to win the bad ones. Now, defensively, these guys are actually doing a nice job stopping the run. They're allowing only 106 yards a game on the ground. Tristan Driggers and Carl Glass Jr., they've combined for over 20 tackles on the season. Driggers also has a pair of interceptions from that linebacker spot. And when it comes to the total, both schools are 2-0 to the under. I'm going to lean toward UL-Monroe plus 49, under 60.5. Next game, Kansas, Houston, 4 o'clock East. Houston's minus 9.5, totals 56 and a hook. Now, this is actually a great number for Houston backers, in my opinion. We're looking at a defense who's been very opportunistic. They're in the top 10 in takeaways, and they have one of the best pass rushers in the country right now in Derek Parrish. The D-man's 4th in the nation with 4.5 sacks. He's also got 14 tackles and a forced fumble. Now they're taking on a Kansas team who's beaten up on the likes of Tennessee Tech and a bad West Virginia squad. And even though it looks like the Jayhawks are putting up a lot of points, they're still 89th in the country in passing yards. Now when it comes to the total, both schools are 2-0 to the over to start the year. I'm going to lean toward Houston minus 9.5, over 56 and a hook. Next ball game, Tennessee Martin taking on Boise State, 4 o'clock Eastern start time. This game's currently off the board. Now Boise State's coming off a nice win in cover over New Mexico. The Broncos held the Lobos to just 14 points in that win. Now this Broncos secondary has also forced 2 interceptions and a fumble recovery. Now, the D's also led by DJ Scram and J.L. Skinner, who have nearly 30 tackles between the two of them. They're taking on a Tennessee Martin team who's allowed 55 points in 2 ball games. I'm going to lean toward Boise State getting the job done against the number. Next matchup, it is going to be Liberty taking on Wake Forest, 5 o'clock Eastern start time. Wake Forest is minus 16.5, total 63 and a hook. And even though I really think this is a punitive number, the Deacs offense is just too powerful. They scored over 44 points in each of their first 2 ball games. They also covered spreads of 33.5 and 14 points during that short span. Wide receivers A.T. Perry and Taylor Moran, they've combined for over 300 receiving yards and 3 scores. Meanwhile, running backs Christian Turner and Justice Ellison, they've combined for over 250 yards on the ground. Now they're taking on a Liberty squad who allowed 27 points to Southern Miss in their opener. These guys also have had a horrible time stopping the run. They're 128th in the nation in rush defense. When it comes to the total, the Flames saw their most recent outing with UAB fall under the number. Meanwhile, Wake Forest opener with VMI fell 2 touchdowns below the line as well. I'm going to lean toward Wake Forest minus 16.5. Under 63 and a hook. Next game, Colorado State taking on Washington State, and that's going to be a 5 o'clock Eastern start time on the West Coast. Now, Wazoo is minus 16.5 with the total at 53 and a hook. And unfortunately, guys, this is another one of those games that I'm betting on personally. So unfortunately, I cannot give this one out for free. Once again, guys, if you want to see whether I'm betting on the total money line or against the spread in this one, there's only one way to find out, and that's to sign up for my college football tier package bets on my website. We do 3 college football tier package bets in that membership a week. And just remember, guys, if you sign up for that package here today, you're going to get access to that membership every single day all the way until October 1st. And once again, guys, as an added bonus, you're also going to get access to all the cheaper memberships on my site, absolutely free. All right, next ball game. It is going to be Marshall taking on Bowling Green, 5 o'clock Eastern start time. Marshall's minus 17, totals 51.5. Now, I'm assuming all the sharps are going to be... they're probably going to deem this a possible letdown spot. But I think this should be like all Marshall in this one. They're coming fresh off a historic win over Notre Dame. It's a historic win for their program. Big win for Marshall. And instead of being a letdown spot here, I think they're going to keep the ball rolling. They're also doing a terrific job running the football. Well, it doesn't matter. You're not watching this at, 47 minutes into the video. Nobody's watching this anyway. Nobody catches that blunder. I'm talking to myself here. Anyway, Kalen LeBourne and Ethan Payne, they've combined for nearly 400 yards on the ground. When it comes to defensive play, well, the Herd's in the top 10 in fewest yards allowed per game. Micah Abraham has a pair of interceptions out of the secondary. Meanwhile, Eli Neal and Charlie Gray, they have 25 tackles between the two of them. They're taking on a winless Bowling Green squad who lost their first 2 games and actually failed to cover both times. Now, the defense has also been kind of pitiful. They've given up 104 points already, and they're allowing nearly 550 yards of total offense a game. Now, when it comes to the total, the Falcons may let Marshall put this one over themselves. BG is also 2-0 to the over. I'm going to lean toward Marshall minus 17 in the over 51.5. All right, guys, if you watched my college football video last week, I took a couple breaks in the video. They were actually half-hour break, every half hour. We went a little bit longer here, but my ass has fallen asleep, so I'm going to take a few minutes, take a break. You can go ahead. By the time you're watching this is already a pre-recorded video, so you can go ahead and fast forward. But just give me a couple seconds here, guys. I got to walk around and stretch out a little bit. So give me a break here. Give me a couple seconds. Actually, we'll just put you down here. Alrighty, guys. Sorry about that little delay there. I appreciate you giving me some time there to take a little break. I'll tell you what, when I got up, my ass cheeks were literally numb. Couldn't feel them. Actually, walked out to the mailbox, checked the mail, had a little junk mail, and then took the garbage can, wheeled it back. Today was trash day, so all right, let's go ahead and get back into it. And we're going to take a look at an SEC showdown. I'm talking about Mississippi State taking on LSU. That's going to be a 6 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, Mississippi State is -3 on the road. Total's 53.5. For some reason, I feel like this has trap written all over it for some reason. We're seeing early movement toward the Bulldogs in this one. And even though Mississippi State can certainly move the football, they did move it against a sputtering program such as Arizona and Memphis. And they're taking on an LSU team who lost a close one to a much improved Florida State team in the opener. The Tigers are also doing a nice job shutting down the pass. They're in the top 30 in the nation right now in pass defense. Greg Penn and Major Burns, they've combined for over 20 tackles between the both of them. When it comes to the total, the Tigers did see their opener against Florida State fall one score below the number. Meanwhile, Mississippi State's most recent outing fell under the line. I'm actually going to lean toward LSU +3 and the under 53.5, and I don't think that is going to be a popular play. All right, next matchup, NCAAF taking on Duke, 6 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, this game's currently off the board. Duke, they are 2-0 in the year, and they covered the number in both of those victories. They beat the likes of Temple and Northwestern. The Blue Devils are also playing some fairly solid defense. Brandon Johnson has an interception, 3 PBU, and a fumble recovery from the secondary. Meanwhile, Darius Joyner and Dorian Mousey, they have nearly 35 tackles combined. Now, they're taking on a winless NCAAF squad who allowed 71 points through 2 ball games. They also were held to 13 points or less in both of those losses. I'm actually going to go ahead and lean toward Duke getting the job done against the spread. All right, next ball game, it is going to be Campbell taking on ECU. That's going to be a 6 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, that game's currently off the board. East Carolina, they're certainly no slouch. I'll tell you this much. Look out for this team. They nearly beat NC State in the opener. Missed field goal cost them the win at the end. Really had the game won. They're also coming off a beatdown of Old Dominion last week as they put up 39 points on the Monarchs. Old Dominion's a good team, man. They beat Virginia Tech this year. Now, this ECU defense has played real tough in both of their games this season. Gerard Stringer, he has 13 tackles, a sack, and a forced fumble from that secondary. Meanwhile, Juan Powell and Tegan Wilk, they have nearly 25 tackles between the two of them. Now, they're taking on a Campbell squad here who allowed 37 points in a loss to William and Mary last Saturday. I'm going to lean toward East Carolina getting the job done against the spread. All right, next ball game, Toledo taking on Ohio State, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Ohio State's -31, total 60.5. And believe it or not, I actually love this number for Buckeye backers. I know it's a big number, but Ohio State's the type of program to really lay it on thick on these other Ohio schools. They rarely come out flat. They really like to hammer the small guys. This OSU defense, they're in the top 10 in stopping the run. And they're led by Michael Hall and Tommy Eichenberg, who each have a pair of sacks. And, of course, quarterback-wise, C.J. Stroud, he continues to thrive. He's thrown for nearly 600 yards along with no interceptions. Now they're facing an untested Toledo squad who played the likes of UMass and Long Island University this year. And when it comes to the total, the Rockets did see their game against UMass fly over the number. Meanwhile, Ohio State could potentially put this one over themselves. I'm going to lean toward the Buckeyes, -31 over, Ohio State -31 over 60.5. All right, next ball game, Arkansas Pine Bluff taking on Oklahoma State, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. This game is currently off the board. Now, the Cowboys should run over these guys. They've scored 92 points already through 2 ball games, and they've gotten some great production out of quarterback Spencer Sanders. He's thrown for nearly 700 yards already, and he has 6 touchdowns. Watch out for Oklahoma State this year. I'm telling you, man, this is a really good program right now. Now, Sanders' favorite targets have been Braden Johnson. One of his favorite targets has been Braden Johnson, who has over 200 yards receiving. He averages nearly 22 yards a catch. Now, they're taking on an Arkansas Pine Bluff team who played teams called North American University and Lane College. I don't know. Never heard of them. Give me Oklahoma State against the number. Actually, I heard of Lane. I'm pretty sure that's a D2 school. Actually, I don't know. I just made that up. Actually, yeah, next game. Actually, we're going to go into our next game. It is going to be Missouri State taking on Arkansas. And that's going to be a 7 o'clock Eastern start time. That game is off the board. Now, guys, you're going to think I'm nuts. But a team like Missouri State is dangerous in the sense that they actually think they can compete with a team like Arkansas. They do. Missouri State is a program that's had a lot of success at the FCS level. They don't realize they have no chance at winning. They're already 2-0 in the season, and they won a whole bunch of games last year. They don't think they should lay down. They want to win the game. Now, Arkansas, they had 2 tough tests against Cincinnati and South Carolina, and they did take care of business, but their defense did not look entirely crisp in those victories. I think the books are going to lay out an absurdly high number, and I think Missouri State, they're probably going to barely cover it, but they're going to be able to keep it close. Give me Missouri State getting the job done against the spread. Next matchup, Akron, Tennessee, 7 o'clock East. Now, Tennessee's minus 47.5, total 67. I really hate this number. I hate it. It's a horrible number. Absurdly high. It's way too high. But the Vols are going to have to cover it. They're 2-0 against the spread this year. They already covered a 37-point number against Ball State. They also took down a Pitt team on the road who actually had a lot of people finishing in the top 10. There was a lot of people who had Pitt as one of the top 10 teams in the country by the end of the year. Now, the Vols can, I'll tell you, they can really sling it. They've thrown for nearly 700 yards already. They've yet to throw an interception. Meanwhile, receiving-wise, Cedric Tillman's been a beast. He has 15 grabs for 230 yards and a score. Now, they're taking on an Akron squad who failed to cover in both of their contests this year. They were actually catching 35 points against Michigan State last week, and they didn't even get on the scoreboard. They got shut out. Now, the Zippies are ranked 123rd in rush defense, and they're allowing over 475 yards of total offense a game. When it comes to the number, Tennessee saw their opener against another MAC school, Ball State. That flew a dozen points above the posted total. They might put this one over themselves. I'm going to lean towards Tennessee minus 47.5 over 67. All right, next game, Texas Tech taking on NC State. That's going to be a 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, NC State's minus 10.5, totals 55. And unfortunately, guys, this is my third and final college football tier package bet on my website this week. So if you want to see whether I'm betting on the money line against the spread or on the total in this one, there's only one way to find out, and that's to sign up for my college football tier package bets on my website. And the link for those plays is in the description section below. That's it. Nothing but free picks from here on out to the end of the video. Next game, Jacksonville State taking on Tulsa, 7 o'clock East. It's tough when a guy's got to make a living. I know. Anyway, this game is off the board. Now, the Jacksonville State Gamecocks are off to a hot start in the FCS. They're 3-0, and they scored 34 points or more in all of those victories. They're also allowing just 12 points a game. They're taking on a Tulsa squad who failed to cover against Northern Illinois and Wyoming. They were the touchdown favorite in both of those games. and they couldn't get the job done. And even though these guys can really sling it, their leading rusher has just 98 yards through 2 contests. I think this number is probably going to end up being a little bit too high. I'm going to lean toward Jacksonville State against the number. Stay cocky. That's their hashtag, by the way. All right, next matchup, it is going to be Northwestern State taking on Southern Miss, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. That game is off the board, and Southern Miss, I think they've got a lot to prove, in my opinion. They're kind of playing like with a chip on their shoulder this year. They've really competed twice against some really good schools. They covered against Liberty and the Miami Hurricanes already this year. I'm glad I didn't fade them. Last week I was thinking about firing on Miami, but glad I didn't. They also have a very good pass rush. These guys have 6 sacks on the season already, and they're led by Malik Shorts, who has 25 tackles and a pick. Now they're taking on a winless Northwestern State team who allowed 47 points in each of their losses. Southern Miss should get the job done here. I'm going to lean toward them. Southern Miss, the Eagles, against the spread. All right, next matchup, Arkansas State taking on Memphis, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Memphis is minus 14, total 65.5. Now, I'm not sure if Memphis is going to be able to stop the passing attack. They're 110th in the nation in pass defense right now. They're also allowing over 430 total yards per contest. And they're taking on an Arkansas State team who covered in both of their ball games this season. The Red Wolves are also doing a pretty nice job protecting the football, and they're rushing for about 200 yards a game. As a matter of fact, these Arkansas State runners, they've scored 6 rushing TDs already. When it comes to the total, the Red Wolves saw their opener against Grambling get over the number. Meanwhile, Memphis, how's everything going in there?
Good. I gotta go set up.
Did you really?
Yep.
Wow, good for you, man.
Go check it out.
Yeah, well, I got a little bit to do, but I don't know if you need to install software, but I got like a email about like installing some software.
Oh, it's already installed. Yeah.
It's already in.
Just like.
So like, are you on and like playing and shit
I'm
already?
waiting for a game to download.
That's awesome, man.
Then I'm gonna use my $50 Visa to.
Your mom does. I didn't even tell your mom that.
It came.
Yeah. Cool, man.
Check it out if you want.
Good deal. Yeah, I got a lot of games I got to do here. All right, what was I talking about? Memphis 2-0 to the over themselves. I'm going to lean toward Arkansas State plus 14 over 65.5. All right, next matchup, Charlotte, Georgia State, 7 o'clock East. Georgia State's minus 19.5, total 61 and a hook. And even though Georgia State has no business laying this big of a number, Charlotte's really bad. I don't know. They showed like a little bit of promise last year in the beginning, but man, they're terrible. They are awful. They allowed 41 points or more in their first 3 ball games this season. And not only did they lose all 3 of their games, they failed to cover every time. Didn't even cover. Charlotte's 125th in rush defense, and they're giving up over 550 yards a game. Now, they're taking on a Georgia State team who put up 28 on North Carolina last week. Wide receiver Robert Lewis, he's averaging 16.5 yards a catch, and he's actually caught 3 touchdown passes. When it comes to the total, Charlotte saw their last 2 get over the line, and in their only under this year, they still allowed 43 points. I'm going to lean toward Georgia State minus 19.5 over 61 and a hook. Next ball game, Tennessee State taking on Middle Tennessee State, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. That game is off the board. Now, Middle's coming fresh off a real nice win against Colorado State. They were catching 14 points and got the outright W. The Blue Raiders have also had a ferocious pass rush. They have 11 sacks on the year already, and they're led by Marley Cook, who has 3 of those sacks by himself. They're taking on a Tennessee State team who lost their first 2 contests this year. They dropped games to Eastern Washington and Jackson State. 2 names I relate that to: Jackson State, Dion; Eastern Washington, Cooper Kupp. But anyway, give me Middle Tennessee getting the job done against the number. All right, next ball game, Michigan State taking on Washington, 7:30 p.m. East. Now, Washington is minus 3.5, totals 56 and a hook. The Huskies were relatively untested in their opening two contests. They beat up on the likes of Portland State and Kent State. They're taking on a Michigan State team who beat up on a couple of MAC schools themselves. Sparty scored 87 total combined points against Akron and Western Michigan, and they covered the number in both of those wins. And even though they definitely missed Kenneth Walker running the football, well, I'll tell you what, running backs Jalen Berger and Jarek Broussard, they've combined for nearly 400 rushing yards between the two of them. So they're getting similar production. I know Kenneth Walker was special. He really was. But they're getting production out of those two guys as well. Now, defensively, on the other side of the ball, the Spartans have forced a staggering 7 fumbles already, really getting after the ball. When it comes to the total, the Spartans do tend to like to get in shootouts with good schools. And Washington, on the other side, they're 2-0 to the over this year. I'm going to lean toward Michigan State plus 3.5, over 56 and a hook. Next game, South Florida taking on the Florida Gators, 7:30 p.m. East. Now, the Gators are minus 24.5, total 60. And even though the Gators struggled offensively last week, they're still doing a pretty nice job of running the football. The Gators are gaining over 200 yards a game on the ground. Meanwhile, defensively, Trey Dean, he's leading the charge with 21 total tackles. Now, they're taking on a USF team who's terrible against the run themselves. These guys are allowing nearly 250 yards a game on the ground. They're also 125th in total yards allowed per game. Now, when it comes to the total in this one, I don't see the Battling Bulls scoring a whole lot of points in this one. Meanwhile, Florida, they saw their most recent game with Kentucky fall 16 points below the number. So I'm going to go ahead and lean toward the Florida Gators minus 24.5 and the under 60 points. Next ball game, Pitt, Western Michigan, 7:30 p.m. East. Now, Pitt is laying double digits on the road here. They're minus 10, total 48. This actually feels like a pretty big number for Pitt on the road. I really think they have some serious problems on the defensive side of the ball. They've allowed 31 points or more in each of their 2 games this year. They also rank 104th in pass defense. Now, they're taking on a Broncos team on the other side who's got a couple of studs on D, pun intended, right? They're the Broncos. They got studs. By the way, famous rapper Megan Thee Stallion. Do these people realize a stallion is a male horse? Like an unneutered male horse? A male horse designed for breeding? Weird name. Megan the male horse. I don't know. Like I said, we're an hour and 12 minutes into the video. I'm sure nobody's watching that, but it makes sense. But anyway, Broncos, they got studs. Studs on D. Zaire Barnes and Ryan Seelig, they have combined for 30 tackles between the two of them. Comes to the scoring, Western Michigan saw last week's game against Ball State fly 16 points above the post number. Meanwhile, Pitt saw their opener against West Virginia get over the total as well. I'm going to lean toward Western Michigan plus 10 and the over 48. Next game, Nevada, Iowa, 7:30 p.m. East. Now, somehow, Iowa's minus 22.5, totals 38. I don't know where these people think Iowa's going to come up with 22.5 points. Now, they do have arguably the best defense in the country, but their offense, they can't score 22.5 points. They're throwing for just 101 yards a game, and they're 131st in the country in total yards. The worst offense I've ever seen. They're taking on a Nevada team who has little problem scoring points. Toa Tua and Devontae Lee, they have rushed for nearly 400 yards between the two of them. Now, the Wolfpacks also scored 9 rushing touchdowns. Meanwhile, defensively, Bentley Sanders leads the country with 4 interceptions from that secondary. The Hawkeyes may have some more issues moving the ball Saturday. They're gonna. they're going to have a tough time moving the football. Now, total-wise, Nevada did see their opener against New Mexico State fall under the number. Meanwhile, Iowa's 2-0 to the under themselves. Got to do it. Nevada, plus 22.5, under 38. Next game, SMU, Maryland, 7:30 p.m. East. Should be a fun game. The quarterbacks stay healthy for the entire game. Should be a good one. Now, Maryland's -4 totals, 73.5. And I know this sounds crazy, but I do think SMU actually has more talented skill players. They're in the top 20 in the country right now in passing yards. They're also averaging over 500 yards of total offense per game. Rashee Rice has just about 300 receiving yards on the year, along with 3 scores. Meanwhile, quarterback Tanner Mordecai, he's thrown 7 touchdowns, and he's been sacked only once. Now, they're taking on a Maryland squad who was fairly untested against Charlotte and Buffalo. Having said that, though, they did actually fail to cover in that contest against Buffalo. Now, this Maryland secondary has been susceptible to giving up some pass yards. And if you think Tua's brothers got to throw it all over the place, well, the strength of SMU's defense is their secondary. Now, when it comes to the scoring in this one, SMU's 2-0 to the under to start the year. Meanwhile, Maryland saw their opener fall under the line. I'm going to lean toward the visiting SMU Mustangs, the Pony Express, +4, under 73.5. Next ball game, Maine, Boston College, 7:30 p.m. East. Now, this game's off the board, and as bad as BC is this year, they have been somewhat competitive with some, much better schools to start the year. Now, BC's also led defensively by Cam Arnold, who has 17 tackles from the linebacker spot. Now, offensively, Zay Flowers continues to shine in Boston. He's got just about 200 yards receiving already and a couple of scores. He's really thrived in not a great system. They're taking on a Maine program on the other side who actually suffered losses to the likes of New Mexico and Colgate. They scored just 18 total points in those 2 games combined. I'm going to lean toward Boston College getting the job done against the spread. Next ball game, UCF taking on Florida Atlantic, 7:30 p.m. East. UCF's -7.5, total 61. And even though UCF got clipped last week by Louisville, I actually do like them in a bounce-back spot. I've been kind of hard on them over the past couple of years, but they are rushing for 250 yards a game, and they rank in the top 10 in the country in that category. Now, the reason why I bang on them a little bit, a couple of years back, they awarded themselves the national championship, which is ridiculous. Stupid. Like, you're not playing good enough teams all year. I get it. You were undefeated. You're playing, like, bad teams, guys. Like, you beating up on bad teams year in and year out. And, they have claimed to be the best in the state for like the last couple of years. It's unbelievable. Like, get a grip. Like, I get it. Inspiration, rah-rah. But come on, man. Let's be, like, a little bit more truthful. Like, best in the state. Get the hell out of here. You're not even close. Anyway, defensively, they do have one of the best pass defenses in the nation right now. These guys are in the top 10 in pass defense. Jason Johnson and Jeremiah John Baptiste, they've combined for nearly 30 total tackles. Now, they're taking on a Florida Atlantic secondary who does struggle a bit. The Owls are 91st in the country in pass defense. When it comes to the total, FAU saw their contest against Ohio fly 29 points above the number. Meanwhile, UCF's opener with South Carolina got 8 points above the line. So I'm going to lean toward UCF -7.5 over 61. Next ball game, it is going to be Louisiana taking on Rice, 7:30 p.m. East. Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns, they are -12.5, totals 50. The Cajuns are off to a real good start. They've actually won 15 straight dating back to last year. As a matter of fact, the Cajuns' last loss actually came on September 4th of 2021 to Texas. And during that stretch of wins, including this year, the Cajuns have played some really tough defense. Louisiana is allowing only 77 yards a game on the ground this year. They're recruiting the best defensive players in the state. Their secondary also has 5 interceptions. Casey Osai and Cam Pettisclo, they have 24 tackles between the two of them. When it comes to offensive production, the Cajuns have yet to throw an interception. Now they're taking on a Rice team who gave up 66 points to USC in their opener. The Owls officially rank 106th in total yards allowed per game. Now when it comes to the number, Rice is 2-0 to the over. Meanwhile, Louisville saw their most recent outing with Eastern Michigan fly over the total. I'm going to lean toward Louisiana minus 12.5, over 50. Next game, Louisiana Tech taking on Clemson, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, Clemson's minus 34.5, totals 52. And in my opinion here, guys, I just don't think Clemson's an incredibly dynamic threat to throw the football. DJ Uiagalelei, he's thrown for only 3 touchdowns through 2 games. Their top 2 receivers really haven't even combined for 200 yards. DJU, he does not pass the eye test, I'm telling you. Now, they're taking on a Louisiana Tech team who does have some offensive weapons. Marquise Crosby, he's rushed for over 200 yards and averages nearly 10 yards a carry. Meanwhile, receiving-wise, the Bulldogs' top 2 receivers have combined for 4 touchdowns between the two of them. Now, total-wise, Clemson's 2-0 to the under, and they've actually gone 7-3 to the under dating back to last year. I'm going to lean toward La Tech plus 34.5, under 52. Next game, UTSA taking on Texas, 8 o'clock East. The Texas Longhorns are minus 12.5, total 61. Now, I don't think Texas San Antonio plays good enough defense to keep up with the Longhorns. And speaking of defense, this Texas defensive unit has looked real strong through 2 games. They actually held Alabama to just 20 points, and they visibly frustrated them all game long. They outplayed Alabama. They definitely did. DeMarvion Overshone and Anthony Cook, they have 25 tackles between the two of them. They're taking on an UTSA team who really doesn't run the ball all that well. They're going to have problems with the Longhorns. But the Roadrunners' biggest issue is actually defense. These guys are allowing 38 points a game. They rank 100th in total yards allowed. So I'd look for the Longhorns to come out swinging. Probably going to be pissed off about getting robbed last week. Texas also saw their first couple of games fall under the number. I'm going to lean toward the Longhorns of Texas minus 12.5, under 61. Next ball game, Montana State taking on Oregon State, 8 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Now this game's currently off the board, but the betting public, they kind of don't have an idea who Montana State is. But just know this, they're arguably the best FCS team in the country. They're on top in the FCS. They're already 2-0, and they scored 103 points in those victories. And I think once this line is released, they're going to be catching a whole lot of points. Now, Oregon State on the other side, I get it. They look really good this year, and they already have a few covers. This is a good team. But my biggest concern with this game is where the line is going to come out at. I think it's going to be a really, really big line. I think it's going to be too big. And I actually think we're going to see a number as if Oregon State was playing the children of the poor, like if they were playing McNeese State. Montana State is a different animal. I'm actually, you're going to want to watch out for this game. I'm going to lean toward the Bobcats of Montana State getting the job done against the spread. All right, next matchup, UTEP taking on New Mexico, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. UTEP's minus 3, totals 38.5. Normally don't see a total that low in college football, but yeah, that's a low one. Now, I do think the Miners can cover this number here on the road. They're coming off a pretty strong 20-13 win over New Mexico State, and they do have a couple of guys who can play defense. It's not a great team, but games like Mexico State, you got to win, and they got the job done. They did win. Now, these guys are holding their opponents to under 195 yards a game passing, so they're not completely helpless. Tyrese Knight and Kobe Hilton, they've combined for nearly 50 tackles between the two of them already. Meanwhile, receiving-wise, they have two pass catchers over 225 yards respectively already. Now, they're taking on a New Mexico squad on the other side who's definitely little threat throwing the football themselves. Quarterback Miles Kendricks, he's completing just 51% of his passes, and he hasn't even eclipsed 275 yards yet. Now, the Lobos' leading rusher has gained only 80 yards on the ground. When it comes to the total, New Mexico saw their opener fall under the number. Meanwhile, UTEP's 3-0 to the under this year themselves. I'm going to lean toward UTEP -3 and the under 38.5. All right, guys, we only got a few more games to go. Once again, I need another break. Long video, long podcast. Give me a couple minutes, and I will be right back. Alrighty, guys, we are down the home stretch here. A couple games to go. So let's go ahead and take a look. And hey, this is definitely one to think about. I'm talking about the Hurricanes, the U. Miami taking on Texas A&M, 9 o'clock East. Now, A&M's minus 5.5, totals 46. And I'll tell you what, this is a great number for A&M backers. Gonna see a lot of overreaction from square bettors moving this line. It's actually Wednesday right now, and we're seeing 64% of the tickets on Miami. Now, the Aggies lost to a very tough Appalachian State team. They're no slouch. They can come up and clip anybody. And A&M, they were just caught with their pants down. A school like Texas A&M, they don't get up for a game like the Appalachian State game. They have, no idea how far Appy's come along. The Aggies still have absolute studs on defense. This is a great defensive unit. They're in the top 10 in pass defense. Antonio Johnson and Chris Russell, they have nearly 35 tackles combined. They're taking on a Miami team who's been fairly untested. They beat up on Southern Miss and Bethune-Cookman to start the year, and they actually failed to cover in that Southern Miss game, by the way. That was fairly competitive in the early going. Now, when it comes to the scoring, I don't see the Canes putting up a whole lot of points here today, or on Saturday. Their most recent game against Southern Miss, that fell 2 scores below the number. Meanwhile, Texas A&M, they are 2-0 to the under to start the year themselves. I'm going to lean toward Texas A&M, minus 5.5, under 46. Next ball game, San Diego State taking on Utah, 10 p.m. East. Now, the Utah running Utes are minus 21.5, totals 49. Now, the Utes do have a lot to prove after losing their opener to Florida. I do still think this is a team who believes they should get into the playoff, and I think they're going to do their best to just blow out weaker teams and really just try to dominate them and show the committee that they deserve to be in the top 4. The Utes are averaging well over 500 yards of total offense a game. Meanwhile, defensively, they're allowing only 104 passing yards per contest. Cole Bishop and Mahmoud Diabate have nearly 30 tackles together. Now they're taking on a San Diego State team who's no threat throwing the football. These guys are throwing for just 85 yards a game. Me and you could do that. I'm telling you, we could. A couple screen passes, they work out. Maybe some rocket screens. Me and you are going to throw more than these guys. Now when it comes to defensive play, they can't defend the pass. Total-wise, Aztecs, last game against Arizona got over the line. Utah 2-0 to the over themselves. Give me the Utes, minus 21.5, over 49. Next ball game could be an interesting one. I'm talking about Fresno State taking on USC, 10:30 p.m. East. USC's minus 12.5, total 74. And even though this is a pretty tough line, really sharp line in my opinion, I do have to ride with the Trojans in this one. They scored over 100 points already in just 2 ball games. They also successfully covered the number in those contests I just mentioned. USC is currently in the top 20 in passing. They're led by Jordan Addison, who has over 225 receiving yards already and 4 touchdowns. Now they're taking on a Fresno team who allowed 35 points to Oregon State in a loss. They were actually favored by 1 in that game, and they took the loss outright. Now, when it comes to the total, that game I just mentioned got nearly double-digit points above the posted number. Meanwhile, USC's 2-0 to the over themselves. I'm going to lean toward the Trojans, minus 12.5, over 74. Next matchup, North Dakota State taking on Arizona, 11 o'clock East. Now, this game's currently off the board, and I'm going to assume the Bison will actually take some money here in the early wagering. Their name is recognizable, and I think a lot of bettors will consider this a sharp play. Well, this is a small school. That's really good. Just keep in mind, North Dakota State started off their season playing teams like NCAAF and Drake. And as bad as Arizona's been over the past season or so, they're a lot faster and stronger than those schools. It's just a different game. As a matter of fact, Arizona beat San Diego State in their opener, and they actually scored 38 points in that win. Jake Cowling and Tatara McMillan, they've combined for over 300 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. When it comes to defensive play, Jerry Roberts has 22 tackles through 2 ball games. I do feel like the public's going to go with the Bison and get punished for it. North Dakota State, sharp play. Get out of here. Give me Arizona against the point spread. All right, next game, Eastern Michigan, Arizona State, 11 o'clock East. Arizona State's minus 20.5, totals 56. Now, the Sun Devils had a pretty tough one against Oklahoma State this past week. That said, though, we're still looking at a Sun Devil program who's relatively sound on defense. They have been for several years now. They're holding their competition under 185 yards a game passing. Kyle Sewell has a pair of interceptions and 21 tackles from that linebacker position. Meanwhile, offensively, running back Xavier Valade has over 225 yards rushing already, and he scored 3 times. He's averaging nearly 7 yards a carry. Now, they're taking on an Eastern Michigan squad on the other side who failed to cover in both of their games this year. As a matter of fact, they allowed 34 points to FCS Eastern Kentucky and actually almost lost that game outright. That was a 1-score game. Now, Eastern Michigan is allowing over 330 yards a game passing, and they rank 119th in total yards allowed. When it comes to the total, Arizona State's 2-0 to the under to start the year. As a matter of fact, these guys have seen unders in 8 out of their last 10 ball games dating back to last season. Give me Arizona State minus 20.5, under 56 in that tight window. With that, we're going to jump into our next and final matchup. Duquesne taking on Hawaii, 11:59 on the island. That game is off the board. And lucky for Duquesne, free vacation to Hawaii. Not bad. Good on their part, and they get paid for it. Man, that's a paid vacation. That is truly a paid vacation. But either way, as bad as Hawaii is, I cannot fade them against Duquesne on the island. They're coming off a cover against Michigan. I get it. They were catching 52 points. A cover's a cover. And defensively, Pavihi, he has 16 tackles and leads the team. Got to lean toward Hawaii getting the job done against the number. And with that, guys, now it's time for our quick pick recap. I like Florida State minus 2.5, under 55 and a hook. Air Force minus 14, over 46.5. Virginia Tech getting the job done against the spread. Georgia minus 24.5, under 51 and a hook. UConn plus 46.5, under 60. Oklahoma minus 10, over 66.5. Give me Kentucky getting the job done against the spread. I like Texas State plus 29.5, under 52. Give me Abilene Christian getting the job done against the spread. Villanova getting the job done against the spread as well. Northwestern against the number. Purdue minus 1.5, under 58 and a hook. Miami, Ohio plus 22.5, under 51. Give me Kent State getting the job done against the spread. Indiana minus 6.5, under 61 and a hook. I like the Towson Tigers getting the job done against the number. Give me Buffalo plus 13.5, over 59 points. I like the Chippewas of Central Michigan getting the job done against the spread. UCLA Bruins minus 15.5, over 59. Give me Iowa State minus 17.5, over 50 points. Rutgers minus 17, under 42 and a hook. I like Old Dominion plus 10, under 52.5. I'm also leaning toward Ball State getting the job done against the spread. I like Cal, the Golden Bears plus 10.5, under 41. Give me Kansas State minus 15, under 47. UNLV minus 3, over 62.5. BYU plus 4, under 57 and a hook. Ole Miss minus 16.5, under 64.5 points. Penn State -3 over 47.5. Now with that Vanderbilt Northern Illinois game, that's actually being featured as one of my college football tier package bets on my website. No free pick for that game. I like Minnesota -27.5 under 46. Give me New Mexico State +37 under 46.5. I like Stony Brook getting the job done against the spread. Troy +13 over 51.5. Georgia Southern +11.5 over 55. UL Monroe +49 under 60 and a hook. Houston -9.5 over 56 and a hook. Boise State getting the job done against the spread. I like Wake Forest -16.5 under 63 and a hook. And with that Colorado State-Washington State game, that's also being featured as one of my college football tier package bets on patreon.com/BrockPage. Give me Marshall -17 over 51.5. LSU +3 under 53 and a hook. I like Duke against the spread. East Carolina against the spread. Ohio State -31 over 60.5. I also like Oklahoma State against the spread. Missouri State against the spread. Tennessee -47.5 over 67. Now that Texas Tech NC State game, that's my third and final college football tier package bet on my website today. And you can access that at patreon.com/BrockPage. Give me Jacksonville State getting the job done against the number. Southern Miss against the spread. Arkansas State +14 over 65.5. Georgia State -19.5 over 61 and a hook. Middle Tennessee against the number. Michigan State +3.5 over 56 and a hook. Florida -24.5 under 60. Western Michigan +10 over 48. Nevada +22.5 under 38. SMU +4 under 73.5. Give me Boston College getting the job done against the number. UCF -7.5 over 61. Louisiana Raging Cajuns -12.5 over 50. Louisiana Tech +34.5 under 52. Texas -12.5 under 61. Montana State getting the job done against the spread. UTEP -3 under 38.5. Texas A&M -5.5 under 46. Utah -21.5 over 49. USC -12.5 over 74. Give me Arizona, the Wildcats against the spread. Arizona State -20.5 under 56. For my next and final free pick for the video, I'm going to lean toward Hawaii, the Rainbow Warriors, getting the job done against the number. And with that, guys, that's going to do it for me. Don't forget to check me out on my website. But most importantly, guys, got to thank you for joining me right here on YouTube. Really hope you enjoyed all this great free content, all this great free information. And with that said, guys, happy Wednesday to you. Well, actually, you're probably not even watching this on Wednesday. You're probably watching it later in the week. So happy week 3 to you. Best of luck to you. And I look forward to seeing you later on today on my website at patreon.com/BrockPage.